All right, I think we're about ready to get started. Thank you all so much for coming here tonight for our lecture series. We sure do appreciate it. And we have very special guests here this evening. And I want to first introduce our Cherokee counselor, Keith Austin. Thank you for being here tonight. Sure do appreciate that. And we have two very special guests here. Tom Lindley has been writing since he was 17 years old, and when he started writing sports for his hometown newspaper in Temple, Texas. His journalism career has taken him all around the country, and he has also written the books Out of the Dust and Opening Doors before writing To the Max. Tom has 2 daughters, 2 sons, and 10 grandchildren, so he's traveling all over the place with them. And Max Weissenhofer is a third-generation Oklahoman who has truly traveled the world producing on Broadway and in London and living life to the fullest. He was born in Oklahoma City and studied at the University of Oklahoma. Some of his favorite productions include Dracula, Song and Dance, Aspects of Love, and our personal favorite, the Will Rogers Follies. We show that here every single day for people to come in and watch. He asked me how we got a copy of it, and I said, I'm not telling you. We don't know how we got a copy, but we have one, so we're excited about that. He also served on the Oklahoma Board of Regents, which oversees OU Cameron. And Dr. Rice, do you know who that third school was? Yes, Rogers State University. I think you guys know each other. And I'll get this turned off in a second. And in 1994, he was inducted into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. He has 2 children. Of course, I could go on, but that's why you're here, is to talk about the book and in Max's life. And just excited that you're here. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tom and Max.
Yeah, what? No, I don't know. Are we on? Can you hear us out there? Okay. Well, you're going to know in a minute that this is not rehearsed. So we thought we would, I'm just going to wing it tonight. You know, I know the story pretty well, but then I got a text from a friend today and told her what I was doing tonight, and she reminded me how lucky I am to be floating in Max's world. And that's so I scrubbed what I was going to say, and then I wrote something else, because writers have to write even if it's badly written. But so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Max, and then we'll go from there. He'll actually get to say something eventually, and then we will, it'll be informal, but then at the end of the show, we'll hope that you might have a few questions or some of the things that we missed. I wanted to, so what I wrote down was, I said that, the person that texted me, my friend, she said, she's right, because the best way I can describe Max is he has lived life on a cloud, catching glimpses of a world most of us never see. And then I'll just try to tell you a little bit about who he is. Max was born into a family of oil wildcatters on both sides, on both his mother and his father's side. One from Oklahoma and one from Kansas and Illinois? Your grandfather? He spent his summers as a boy on the Pacific in La Jolla, California, and grew up eating his meals in the dining room at their home in Nichols Hills, surrounded by Renoirs and Monets that his mother had purchased as part of her interest in Impressionist art. About a time before it really became, about the time it became popular, right? I mean, she was collecting it even back then. But this cloud wasn't always soft and pillowy that I was talking about. There have been plenty of stormy days. His father died before Max graduated from OU. Is that okay? OU? Okay. And his first wife, Fran, lived long enough to convince him to produce Will Rogers Follies. And while Max was considered among the top 5 producers on Broadway in the 80s, I mean, the producers that if you had a show that you really thought was going to go somewhere, these were the 5 people that you took it to. But it was a struggle for him, even though he had, you know, a number of successes. The reality is that the oil industry is a lot less volatile than show business, and we'll talk a little bit about that, you know, later on as we go through. Max sort of lost interest in Broadway in the '90s. A lot of it had to do with the death of Fran and also the changes that were happening in the industry at that time. But he reinvented himself in 2005 when he partnered with Nika Burns to buy 6 playhouses from Andrew Lloyd Webber in the West End in London, and they have created a company that's producing some of the best work in the world. I mean, you've got Harry Potter still playing right now, right?
Well, we're coming out of the pandemic.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, well, I forgot about that.
So basically, it starts playing again in October when we can get to capacity.
Okay.
Theaters are open right now in the UK at 50%. They're supposed to go to full capacity on Monday, but I don't think we're going to get there yet. So.
Okay. Okay, this is my big spiel on Mac, and he didn't pay me to say this. There is no one like Max, and there never will be anyone close. The world in which he grew up and the theatrical and art worlds in which he interacted with the biggest names in the business are over. It's all gone corporate, and the handshake deals and most all of the actors, the directors, and producers who gave rise to one of the grandest eras on Broadway is gone. Yet Max, operating from faraway Oklahoma, remains viable today, 40 years plus after he won his first Tony Award for the play Dracula. To know Max is like lighting a prairie fire to your imagination. He has been to more places, met more interesting people, and knows more about the stage, the big screen, art, cars, and guns than any 10 books could capture. At the same time, he is understated, self-effacing, reluctant to take a bow, and has a shyness about him and a dry sense of humor that some probably mistake as aloofness. Above all else, Max has an eye for talent, the ability to gauge what will appeal to an audience, and the fearless nature of an Oklahoma Wildcatter. His father would be proud. And since we were in the house that Will Rogers built, I wanted to spend a lot of time, some of the time at first talking about maybe some passages from the book that talk about Max's connection to Oklahoma and to Will Rogers and the Follies, and then we'll go from there. And as I go along, I'm going to hopefully that Max will sort of interject here. I'm doing this just so maybe you'll want to buy the book, right? I mean, it's sort of part of the show. This is just from Max's youth, and just read one paragraph. First came the movies, then popcorn and concession stands and 3D, all of it culminating just in time to seize on the euphoria of post-World War II America. By the late 1940s, the heavy churn of westerns, war heroes, monsters from the deep, and cops and robbers had captured the imagination of one highly impressionable set of moviegoers in particular, kids. But in the case of a young Max Weisenhofer, the big screen devoured him as if he were an audience of one. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, watching movies when you were a kid, including the one Will Rogers Theater, which opened about that time?
Yeah, about that time. I think it's something not on. Now it is. Okay. That's beyond, the modern things are beyond my. No, I think basically, I mean, a lot of you, you have to remember that those years, all those years, there was no television, There was radio, and movies changed. The movies changed twice a week in almost every movie theater, and that was about the most. I was very fortunate because my parents liked to go to the movies, and my father decided that Sunday school wasn't a good idea, and we should go to the movies on Sunday, and my father was pretty much big fanatic of Randolph Scott and John Wayne, and those were the movies we saw. And it was an era. That's what people did in those days, and the movies were movies. With Will Rogers, and then getting through the Depression with all the Busby Berkeley movies and Ginger Rogers. Movies had occupied a much more important role in people's lives, the ones that were very adult, which we don't even have those today, the Betty Davis. And anyway, I was fixated on the movies, and that I never stopped going.
Talk about Westerns a little bit, and John Wayne is going to come up here in a minute, just any second now.
Well, I think, we look on, those movies, Western movies, the Western movies in my childhood were the movies that everybody, you went to because they were the story. They had all the characters that had bigger than life, and basically, whether it was particularly with John Wayne, who was, when you got into the stories like The Searchers and Red River, and you came out of that period where you lived in the area that these movies took place. They were very thrilling because they were part of your character, part of the character that you lived in. And these, we were in an era of really significant people, of both in motion pictures, in politics, FDR and Eisenhower and MacArthur. It was a whole era of growing up with these gigantic people. And in the movies, you had John Wayne. For most of us.
All right, we'll talk. Maybe if you have some more questions about that, we'll get back to that later. I think that what I found, Max has the biggest library of films that you. I mean, how many do you think you've got? 5,000?
No, but I've got hundreds.
He's got a huge collection of movies. I mean, before he discovered the theater, he had discovered, like most kids, like we said earlier, he had discovered the big screen. And that's influenced him a lot, I think, in terms of having a sense for what an audience will want, what plays, and I think, what maybe helped to determine some of the plays he's picked to produce. Next, keeping with this Oklahoma theme, there's a paragraph that starts off. Ever since the bison stopped roaming, the middle of the country has not taken on much significance. What I have found was that this state, Oklahoma, is an enigma to everyone, as no one has ever come here or wanted to be here, says Max. It is, I suppose, like being E.T. That was not said as a condemnation, but more as a miscalculation on the part of others. Sure, some attention was paid to the discovery of oil and the big cloud that produced the Dust Bowl. Oklahoma and Nebraska football have penetrated the national conscience over the decades. It's also true that the hit musical Oklahoma still makes people burst into song, although they may not have a clue as to exactly where Oklahoma is situated among the states. The Alfred P. Murrah federal building bombing in Oklahoma City in 1995 did wake up the nation and brought people together for a while, but that indelible imprint was soon erased by a more unimaginable form of evil and greater division. Tornado chasers have put us on the map, the weather map at least, with their up-close, just-in-time views of looming terror. In the end, all that seems to do is scare good people away. That's the way it is when you're in the middle of nowhere, at least by the west and east coast measurements. The avoidable can always be avoided using a blind eye. After all, commercial airliners en route from Los Angeles to New York fly over the heartland as fast and as high as they can, oblivious to what lies below. and the view from the East Coast is at the Hudson River or maybe the Allegheny Mountains, if they want to concede some territory, divides the two coasts with nothing in between. Likewise, those traveling by more conventional means along Interstate 40 consider Oklahoma to be a mere toehold on the slow climb to the majesty of the Rockies. On the surface, there's not much reason to linger here, and it's hard to make a first impression when you're not given a second thought. But none of the tranquility of the prairie and the unrelenting spirit of its people can be ascertained from 34,000 feet. That's also true of the innate beauty that softens a hard land. For example, there's nothing more breathtaking than the way a hillside wrapped in big blue stem grass shimmers like a sea against a red sky as light falls slowly over the Nature Conservancy's Tallgrass Prairie Preserve in the northern reaches of Osage County. The same can be said for the kind of work ethic, resiliency, and values Midwesterners hold dear. Must seem foreign to the elites and awkwardly out of place in a look-at-me society. It is not easy to glean by his manner or his taste for modern art and architecture, but Max Weisenhofer is clearly cut from the same cloth. And here, tell us a little bit about your childhood and why Oklahoma, it means so much to you, has meant so much to you your whole life, and why you've had so many chances to live in so many places. This is your home still.
Well, I think, one of the things that comes out of it, I think for all of us that are here, this state, for those of us that are generationally here, I think that, my grandfather came here in 1885 from Austria, came to Lexington and had a saloon in what was then the, Lexington was known as the center of saloons in the territory in those days. And, and across the river was Purcell, which was Indian territory. I think my father was born in the hospital in Purcell. And I think that, there's something within, there's a very strange thing in this state among those of us that have lasted through, through the Dust Bowl and the people that left during that period. And I think that there's something within this state for all of us that something very special, because I think everybody here, everyone that's here and has stayed here generationally have gone through very hard times and very difficult times. And my father had to work his way through Central High School selling newspapers, and then, was very lucky because he went into business with a friend of his who was in the mule business, whose mule business went south because World War I was over and nobody was buying mules. And the two of them decided it might be a good idea to go in the oil business. So basically, they made the right decisions, but it's still, this has been a tough place, and it's a wonderful place because the people were very, very different people. And when I lived in New York all those years, I was very popular because nobody had ever seen anybody. I was like some sort of something that came out of the zoo.
Yeah.
And
they also thought you were just another rich oil tycoon, had lots of money, and they wanted you could invest in their shows, right?
Right, but then after a few flops, the thing about the theater that's wonderful is that it's not like the motion picture business in that you go from one show to the other, and there's no guarantee if you have a success that the next one is going to be a success, and it usually isn't. And there's always a thing in New York with people in the theater. My friends always said, you have a big hit, and they're very unpleasant about it, and they always say, well, what are you going to do next? And I think that, it's a tough business, and I think it's a business, it's a very learning business anyway.
Well, speaking of hits and misses, I'm just going to read one more passage, and this will get us into Will Rogers and the Follies, and Maxwell, I think, will go into more detail about how all that came about, because I think that's, it's really, the backstory of that is really pretty amazing. But here's what I said about that chapter that talks where there's a will. The world certainly admires a man who can twirl a lariat and talk at the same time. At least Florence Ziegfeld Jr. sure saw a lot of star potential for someone with such skills, and more than 70 years later, so did modern era showman Max Weisenhofer. It often takes one to know one, and when it came to William Penn Adair Will Rogers, no one could entertain folks better than he could. Ziegfeld quickly latched onto him, making the Oklahoma Cowboy the featured star in the Ziegfeld Follies on Broadway in 1916. Not to be outdone, Weisenhofer, who has always been partial to both cowboys and musical revivals, reintroduced stage audiences to the man with a rope, a grin, and a quip in the 1991 Broadway production, The Will Rogers Follies. Max, can you just walk us through how the Follies came to be?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing, since we're in this facility here. That I think what I've done a number of shows, with Lloyd Webber, and then shows like Dracula, and then I've had some serious dramas, and I'd kind of reached the end, wanting to do something that was really, all of a sudden something else. And I went to, we had in those days what were called auditions for new shows, new projects, and I went to the Tavern on the Green, and the creative people for the Will Rogers Follies, and Comden and Green and Cy Coleman and Peter Stone and Keith Carradine, they went through the show and sang the numbers, not quite all the dialogue, but the numbers of the show. And it was, what I really liked about it is that they had, that what they'd done is that they'd taken someone like Will Rogers, who had a life that was really very perfect. I mean, normally with Broadway shows or any kind of shows you do, you always take the central character, even if they're famous, and you always sort of concentrate through the show on the negative things that they were, or the negative things that happened to them. And what was interesting with this, I particularly liked, is they'd taken somebody that was absolutely, probably had one of the most successful careers, nothing negative in his life except for the death of his child, and a perfectly happy marriage and nice family, and then a tragic end. And they had decided to put that into an evening, an event that was characterized, telling his life, but telling his life through the way that it would have been told by Ziegfeld, with the numbers, all the numbers about his life, having sort of dance and whatever. And then they picked Tommy Tune to direct it, and Tommy was not big on book musicals, which was good, because this was the Ziegfeld type show. And I really, I thought this is probably one of the best things I've ever seen, and mainly because it was part of where I came from, and then I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. I had my late wife was terminally ill, and basically I'd gone home, and I had a videotape of this audition, and I showed it to her, and I said, she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm not going to do it." And she said, "Yes, you are." And that started the chain of events that led to actually doing the show. The show had a number of really ups and downs, in the sense of we had too much scenery, the costumes were too expensive, we were way over budget in those days. The show was budgeted, I think, at $3 million in those days, which was pretty unheard of. Now there are shows that doesn't even get you anywhere. But and then we gotten into previews. We were previewing in New York. We couldn't go out of town because it was too expensive. So we started previewing at the Palace in New York, and there were a couple of us, myself and Stuart Lane, who was one of my partners, that we really kept looking at the show. The interesting thing with the way the show was done is that every night, Tommy Tune had a system where he would, after every evening's performance, we would have a meeting with the creative people and the producers, and we would discuss what we'd seen the night before. And you know, there were numbers that didn't work. There were jokes that didn't work. And Tommy Tune's attitude was always that 3 nights in front of an audience, and if it didn't work, it was out. And this was probably the end of what we were talking about, the golden era of Broadway, because Comden and Green and Cy Coleman, and Comden, in case you don't know, Comden and Green wrote Singing in the Rain. They wrote all these, you know, and they were great writers. And they would take a musical number out of the show and overnight write another number, and that number would be in the next night. And the same thing was true of the dialogue and the jokes. If the joke didn't work 3 times, it left, and another one was put in that night to be rehearsed during the day and then put in that night. I mean, that's the way these shows operated. And we'd gotten to a point where we were in previews, and we hadn't been, and opening night was quite a few, you know, several weeks off, and we were out of money. And then basically we had to sit down. We had a meeting of the producers, and I had a number of partners, and we had one person that had put the show together originally, a person by the name of Pierre Cosette, who really mainly never done a Broadway show, and he'd also had just done the Grammys and things like that. And he said, well, we're out of money, we have to close the show. And I mean, we hadn't even opened, and Stuart and I knew, you know, from looking at the previews and looking at the audiences, we knew this show was a hit. I mean, you could tell. There's a thing in the theater when you're in the theater and watching something. When you're really working at it, you know when all of a sudden this everything is hitting on the right at the right moment. You can tell from the audience. You know, it's the same thing is true when I've had a flop and I've gone to the first preview, and I said to my partner, we've got to close it. This is terrible. I mean, but so we just told Pierre, you know, you can leave and we're keeping the show open. And then we got very lucky with one other thing. We had a terrible critic at the time in the New York Times, Frank Rich, who hated virtually anything that was popular. And the New York Times was a very, very important review. And on the other hand, in those days, we had a Sunday Times, and I can't remember the critic who was the Sunday Times. It's one gone blank.
This is sort of their B-team critic, I guess.
You know,
yeah.
anyway, we found out that we were going to get from the Sunday Times a rave review from the Sunday Times. So in order to counteract, which we knew was going to be bad review from the New York Times, we knew when the Sunday Times was coming out with the review, and we ran what was called, in those days, a double truck. And a double truck is a two full page ad for the show.
Newspaper
In
ad.
the newspaper ad in the New York Times. And that was on top of with all of these quotes we'd had and things we'd had about the show, and that was at the time the Sunday Times review came out. And that put the show over. At that point, the show became a big hit, and Frank Rich disappeared somewhere. His wife didn't. She had a column in the papers every Friday, and she attacked the show from time to time too.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
Tell us about how it won the Tony.
Well, it was interesting with the Tony Awards because that year, the big hit in New York, besides us, was Miss Saigon, um, Vaudeville musical, and Miss Saigon was, I don't know how many of you ever seen Miss Saigon, but Miss Saigon was a very anti-American musical about our problems in Vietnam, and ended with the helicopter taking everybody out and whatever. And had a big star, Jonathan Pryce. And, you know, we got very lucky again because right before the Tony Awards and things, or whatever it was, you know, we had just won the war in Iraq, and there was a big military parade in New York, and it was, people were in a very, very positive, it's hard to believe now, but we were in a very, very positive mood. New York and the country was in a very big positive mood. And, you know, when General, I've gone blank, you know.
Schwarzkopf.
Huh?
Schwarzkopf.
Schwarzenegger came to the theater that night. The
Schwarzkopf.
night he came to the theater, the whole audience stood up and started applauding. So we rolled into the Tony Awards, you know, where people were really not terribly interested in giving Miss Saigon the award. Then in that evening, all of a sudden, you know, you sit there, you're very nervous because you don't know what's going to happen, and then all of a sudden we started picking up costumes, and you know, we started picking up all the early awards, and then we knew we were pretty much home free. Keith didn't get Best Actor. Jonathan Pryce did for Miss Saigon, and that was about it, I think, at the time.
So what's it like to win a Tony Award? What's the feeling like?
Well, it's probably, I suppose, you know, with these awards, you sit around and wait, and you know, then it's pretty thrilling. And you have to admit, you really like it. And, you know, I mean, you know, you get up there and in front of all those people, and you get something, and then it's a big thrill. I think that was the biggest one I've ever had, because that show meant something, actually, than some of the other things.
Tell us a little bit about how you got into the producing game, the producer's game in New York. And at that time, he went to New York to sell art, to be an art dealer. And
it didn't work out.
Well, it sort of did, but it really wasn't your love. I mean, but
well, I think, you know, really, I think one has to remember that one's career is always basically successful because of mentoring. You know, you like to think to yourself, oh, you're this great genius or whatever it is, but you're really not, because you're really in a constant learning process from the people that really know what they're doing, and you have to be like a giant sponge, and it's the same thing in the reverse today, in that, you know, the theater today is totally different than the theater was in those years, and you're now learning from the younger people, and the shows are different, they have different subject matter, they have a different way of being doing, and if you want to be successful in the business today, you also have to be learning from what is happening now. I think that, you know, in my case, I had a call from my mother. I mean, the basic thing is I had a call from my mother who'd been in London and seen a show called Sleuth, a show you would never remember anymore, but it was a murder mystery two-hander, which was a big hit in London and coming to New York, and I went through the theatrical index and to see who was producing it, and it was a person named Morton Gottlieb, who was one of the really top producers in New York and been around. He'd even seen the opening of Showboat. That's how long he'd been around. And I called him up and said, is there anything I can do? You know, we had this talk. He said, no, I don't, you know. And then we had lunch, at the Yale Club because Morty had gone to Yale, and I just kept talking and talking, and he said, well, come on and become part of the production. And then I learned from him and his general manager and all the ways. He was very cheap, and I learned exactly how you put a show together in a way that was very, very, very professional in that way. And then the next mentoring I had was from Bernie Jacobs, who was president of the Schubert Organization, and we were very close, and I was very close to Alfred Drake, who was Curly in Oklahoma, and I learned about Oklahoma, the musical, from him, and basically I learned about what stars do, I've learned about what theater owners do, what producers do, and you know, if you work with that with a certain quality, you get it anyway. So
I think you're simplifying it, but that's okay.
yeah, I'm simplifying it a bit, you know.
Yeah, really.
What I would say that I did learn is that, you know, it's a very personal business, and the theater is a cottage industry made up of basically nice people who aren't like motion picture people, because most of us have had so many flops that there's not a level of arrogance that floats around.
Let's talk about. Well, this is the opposite of a flop. Phantom of the Opera, which is my favorite, but that's neither here nor there. But talk a little bit about how you got involved in investing in that show at a time when it was teetering on whether or not he was going to get enough backing to be produced.
Well, what happened is that I'd always been, I did song and dance with Andrew and Bernadette Peters when she won the Tony Award. We hoped to win the Tony for Best Musical, but Frank Rich said it was one of the worst shows he'd seen that year. And then, so my relationship with Andrew, we were always quite good friends. He was getting ready to do Phantom, and Phantom had opened in London, and he was in partnership with the biggest one, Cameron Mcintosh, who did Miss Saigon and everything. But Cameron didn't like me after a situation we had with Song and Dance, where we got in an argument over the director. And anyway, he was co-producing. He was really the financial producer behind Phantom when it got ready to move to New York. And I'd asked to have an investment in Phantom from Really Useful from the Lloyd Webber Company, and they told me that there was nothing available. That's what happened. And I think it was 1987, and the stock market crashed. None of you would remember. The stock market dropped at the biggest one-day drop since the Depression. I don't remember why. It just, anyway, it doesn't matter. And I got a call from Really Useful, and they said, we need money.
Really Useful, that's the name of this production company.
Really Useful,
yeah.
It's Really Useful company. And they wanted a very large amount of money, and I called a couple of friends of mine and called them back, and I said, you can have it tomorrow. And that's how we were able to take we had a very large investment in Phantom.
You didn't lose money on that.
Huh?
You didn't lose money on that.
No, but the investment in Phantom went, in a lot of ways, went with Andrew's other shows that I invested in, like, I won't go into all of those, you know. Andrew hasn't had, the truth of the matter is, after Phantom, the Lloyd Webber shows, my favorite, you know, Aspects of Love and Sunset Boulevard, which were terrific shows, never really financially recouped at all. It's very interesting. And the sequel to Phantom didn't either. Love Never Dies. School of Rock has been very successful. That's the newest one. He has one called Cinderella right now. That's just in previews. Anyway.
Well, before we turn it over to you, so I know your questions will be a lot better than mine, but one more, just about what do you like about the theater in London, the West End? What is it that appeals to you, say, versus
Well, I think,
Broadway?
you're getting to the point, really kind of one of the things we were talking about is that London right now mirrors the golden age of Broadway in that my Broadway, you could do a play, the plays didn't have to run very long to recoup. The investment in putting them together was doable. I mean, shows like Dracula cost $180,000 to produce, and on top of it, it made 8 times its investment back in the course of its run. Nowadays, in New York, you're very, very lucky with a play or anything, unless you have a giant star who has to play at least 26 weeks to get your money back. And it's just a different type of business. London is exactly like New York was back in the days of the 70s, 80s, because the shows are the capitalization is very low. I mean, they're still high, but the capitalization is low. The plays are only booked for 12 weeks. And in the 12-week period, if you have a success with a show, the investor can make 10%, 10 or 15%. And on top of it, you can get big stars because, we had, you can get, because the stars like to 12 week of work they're not committed to work 26 weeks or a year, and they have 4 weeks of rehearsal, 12 weeks of playing, and then these are with the plays, and then they can go on and do movies or whatever they're doing to really make them do well. And so the demands for high salaries and everything are not there. The musicals in London are totally different because they need to run quite a while, and that's what you want as a long-running musical. But we're in the play business, our company mostly.
Okay, enough of me. So you want to have a question? You want to take that?
If you have a question, just say it, and I'll repeat it so the microphone will pick it up for our recording. So if anybody has a question, I'll listen in and I'll repeat it so the microphone can pick it up.
One down there. We have one down front here.
How'd you get interested in writing about Max?
I'm sorry, say that again.
How did you get interested in writing?
In writing,
about
just
Max?
writing in general.
I think about Max.
About this book.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a good question because
that's a good one.
Because my background, I didn't know anything really. I mean, I liked the theater, but I didn't know anything about the theater, and I didn't really know anything. I didn't even know who Kandinsky was before I met Max and saw Kandinsky hanging in his bedroom. But a friend put us together, Gene Rainbow, who I wrote, Gene started Bank First, and he's from Oklahoma City, and he's one of the biggest supporters of Oklahoma there is. I mean, he's done phenomenal things for this state, and he loves the state. Anyway, Gene thought Max's story should be told, and he was right. I don't think Max had a very good publicist the whole time he was really doing his thing. I mean, he didn't. If you look at what he's accomplished, and it's pretty amazing, really. I mean, we add it all up. But in Oklahoma, I don't even think, he really not that many people, even at the university, OU, where, he is on the faculty. I don't think they really recognized it or appreciated it, or maybe they weren't that interested in it, whatever. So Gene brought us together, and Max was reluctant, just like Gene was reluctant. The only reason I think Gene wanted to have his book written was so that someone might see that, how he got started in life and how hard it was, and that you too can overcome something if you just work, if you just give it all you've got. And, Max's story is a little different from Gene's. I mean, Gene was from a divorced family and pretty much was on his own since he was 8. But, Max had certainly more support from his parents and had the means and the education and all that. But yet, I thought he's just so interesting. I mean, when you get to know him, he's done I said that at the outset, he's done so many things. He's seen, you were in he's had opportunities to see he's standing on the Hitler's bunker in Germany when he's 18 on a summer, on a summer trip. This was in like 1954, pretty early before Americans were even, going to Germany. So, but I thought Max was sort of a mystery. I think maybe that's the nature of producers. They are in the background, so except when it's, time to write the check. And so I was just sort of, and I researched him and looked into what I could find out about him before, we agreed to sit down and talk. And I was just thought, well, there's a lot more to be told here than what had really been, I think, written about or talked about. And I think one reason for that, I guess, unlike movies and television, a lot of Broadway shows, there's just not a record of them out there. I mean, it's hard to find them all on YouTube. And so it's a very visual medium, but it's really not, it's very more personal between the audience and the actor. And so so I thought what he had to say about how all this happened, I thought would just be, an interesting story. And he's in Oklahoma. Which is, not disparaging. Oklahoma's produced a lot of great talent. That. Musicians and actors and, Van Heflin, there's a picture of Max when he was 8 years old with, getting Van Heflin's autograph. So, but I still thought that that his story would be of interest to more than just his grandchildren, that kind of story. I'm understating it, obviously, but and I thought he had a lot to offer about Broadway then and Broadway now, how shows are produced, and we haven't even got into some of the names. He's got actors and producers and directors and some of the those he's encountered, and it's a fascinating bunch of people. So that's sort of how it came about. And the challenge is that I didn't know anything about banking either when I wrote about Oklahoma's biggest banker. But so the challenge for me was just getting to know the subject matter itself, and then getting to know the person. And as you know from your own story, there's so much more to the story than people realize on the surface. And I had the privilege of digging deep. We spent a lot of time together. Probably 60 hours or more together, interviews and just talking. And so, that's a great opportunity for me to just, really get to know someone. And I was lucky to get to do this.
So now that I've been here with you, you're going to have to do my eulogy.
You'll never die.
No, I just think that it's it's really it was wonderful working with him, and we were also both very fortunate in that my mother never threw anything out.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So we had masses of material that my mother had accumulated over the years from clippings and things that even I'd forgotten about. But
yeah.
it's it's fun, and it's been a great time. I've loved every minute of what I've been doing, and I've been very lucky. You know, a lot of it's luck. It's just don't kid yourself, you know, and luck in having a good PR person like this or something. You know, it's.
While you were working with the Follies, did you have any interaction with the Rogers descendants?
While you were working with the
no,
Follies,
the only person I had.
I was going to say, I was just repeating it here real quick.
Yeah.
While you were working with the Follies, did you have any interaction with the Rogers family?
No, there were none of the Rogers family around at all. I think at the opening, I think somebody, I can't remember who came. The only person I was in contact with constantly was Joe Carter from the museum. And in the lobby of the theater at the Palace when the show was running, we had all kinds of memorabilia from here. I don't know. I mean, I never met the Rogers family. Were kind of a mystery, I think. And by that time, I can't remember whether there was one son.
Yeah. I don't know. That didn't really come up much. And
It really didn't come up at all.
Jim Rogers was at the opening.
Yeah, Jim. I knew there was one person there, but that was, you know, that was it. And you know, when you watch the show, one of the things you may not realize if you watch the video that the person that's doing Flo Ziegfeld, the voice, it was done by Gregory Peck did that for us. So it was kind of an interesting sidelight to that.
So, Lindley, what other subjects have you wrote about?
What other subjects have you written about?
well, I was in newspapers most of my career. You know, I started at 17. All I wanted to do was write sports. You know, and I did that for a long time. But when I got out of the newspaper business in about 2000 I came to Oklahoma in 99, and I wrote a column for the Oklahoman for about 3 or 4 years. It was a great gig. I wrote a front page column twice a week, and I got to do pretty much go anywhere or write about anything I wanted to. And I went to every county in Oklahoma, and I wrote a lot about, you know, issues that I guess I thought were important to the state, but I always tried to write them through the eyes and the words and the feelings of people. I just believe that it's all about people. And if you can get a reader to see themselves maybe through this person you're writing about or identify with something, then you've got a chance to maybe make a difference. So I did that for a long time, and then I got involved in Oklahoma Watch, which is a nonprofit, then it was investigative website that is still there today, that looks into, you know, public issues in the state. I just got involved in one about why Oklahoma locked up so many women, because that we always have, and did that. And then I got into. I used to think I would never write a book. You know, that's sort of what everybody thinks you're supposed to write a book, and I just didn't think I had the discipline or the ability to do it. But then I wrote Gene's book, and then I did another book called Opening Doors, which is a story of about 13 Oklahomans from real diverse backgrounds who really accomplished something with their lives. It's just sort of a you can do it too's book, but you know, it has some very just a range of, you know, of men, women, you know, very, you know, pretty good cross sector of, you know, of the state, and did that, and that was sponsored. Really, Gene and Jim Tolbert wanted that book to be circulated in, you know, high schools across the state. Maybe counselors could, you know, give it to a student that may have potential, but it's just not, you know, doesn't see a future for themselves. And so, and this gets back to what Max was talking about, he was talking about mentors. You know, kids need role models, and they do better if they have an adult that's helping them along the way, or someone, if they can see themselves in that person. So I did that book, and then I did Max's book, and I'm working on a new book about it's sort of in this part of the world, it's going to be called Tall Grass, Big Dreams, and it's a historical narrative about what I call the Twin Territories. You've heard about that. It's sort of how Oklahoma came to be from two different perspectives. You know, one through Clem Rogers, who had one view of what should happen to this part of the world, and another guy named Sidney Clark, who really nobody knows about, but who had more to do with opening the land, the territory to white settlement, or I should say non-white, or white settlement than any other person in the state's history, as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, so you have these two tracks, you know, leading across the prairie, and they don't have the same goals. They have opposite goals. Yet, you know, in the end, we had one state. And so it's a story of how that happened through, you know, I thought both of them were real. I think Clem Rogers is an amazing figure in of himself. I don't know what you think about it, but I just think I can't imagine what it would have been like when he went out on the frontier as an 18-year-old and decided he was going to build a ranch in 1856, I think it was. So I think both very strong men, different goals, but I think which in a way represents, I think, what Oklahoma is. You know, we've had a hard time figuring out who we are exactly, because you've got two histories, and you could say one comes at the expense of the other, but I think a lot happened before 1879 or 1889 in the land run that's worth pondering today. So that's sort of what I do. You know, the writing is hard, but the interviewing is a lot of fun, and the research.
Were you at the Oklahoman during the Murrah bombing?
No, I was. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Were you at the Oklahoman during the Murrah bombing?
No, I didn't come to Oklahoma until '99, but I mean, I think it was in 2005.
2005.
I
Yeah.
10-year anniversary. I did a column on the interview. I interviewed some of the children that had survived. You know, they were like 5. You know, they were in the daycare, and they were 5 and 6 at the time. And I did a column on them at 16. You know, looking back about, you know, their, you know, sort of what had happened to them and what they thought about, and that was a pretty moving interview. You know, with the 2 or 3 of them that I interviewed for that. But you know, I mean, Oklahoma City really. I don't want to say the bombing. It changed the city. You know, as I think it probably changed the state and maybe if not the nation. But it came in the middle of this, this boom period for Oklahoma City, and city, I think the city leadership, you know, the voters and the public really pulled together to do some fairly remarkable things, you know, in the aftermath of that, which has made Oklahoma City, I think, a much more stronger and vibrant city today than it might have ever been, really.
I've got a question.
I saw one more hand. Oh.
Yeah, Max, when I'm sure there's a lot of people that would love to be in the inner circle of Broadway in London, and you were there, but what was it like to get in the door right at the beginning to get to that point where people called you up and said, hey, would you like to produce our play or musical?
No, what was that?
From like at the very beginning to get into Broadway and into that position to be
Well, I think,
called?
I think, look, what I always tell the students, you know, when I work with students now at the university over in fine arts and things, that part of their success, and it doesn't have anything to do with whether they're in the theater or musical theater or they're in the business school or wherever they are, that part of one's success, that if one wants to be successful, you really have to start from day one in the networking. I mean, there's a reality that you have to get out and network with people that are in the field that you're interested in trying to. In the theater, it's a matter of the networking occurs by going to opening nights, by getting invited to certain opening night parties, and you know, you just go around and with your, you know, one of the best things about Oklahomans is that nobody realizes this. We're very strange, and that in New York we are particularly strange, and people like us because nobody could figure us out. I'm serious. I mean, you know, you say from Oklahoma, and then everybody, this is a blank, and I think all of us that come from this state, there's a very openness about us and a very honest, and what I think is very strange to people from New York and California and things is, and the same thing in the UK, is that we're very open and we're basically very honest, and that's something that people just can't quite fathom. You know, they meet somebody and they think this can't be real, and we are. I mean, you know, and so that's part of what you do, and then you just have to keep pressing yourself on people that you meet that you know are going to help you. I mean, you know, you talk to them, you work, you know, you try to become friendly, and then if they like you, they'll pull you along. Isn't that about that's how it works? It's not like the movie business, which is terrible. No.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And before we let you go here, we want to give you a little gift. It's one of my favorites now. It's a box of chocolates from Glacier Chocolates, and in that it's kind of like a little. Yeah, you know, it's what everybody needs. You may not need it, but you want it. That's the thing. And this is each one of these kind of like an advent calendar. And there's Will Rogers in here and Route 66 and different Oklahomans. Behind every one of those is a good piece of chocolate. So we really appreciate you being here. Would everyone please give them a hand for taking their time tonight?
Oh, the one thing I would tell you that'll be of interest to you, you know, the new version of Oklahoma is coming to Oklahoma City, and it's very psychologically, it doesn't treat us quite as well as the old version, but I know from Alfred Drake, who was the original Curly, that the old version was, first of all, was about, the main thing about the show is it's about who's going to take Lori to the picnic. And you'll be very interested when the new version comes here that it becomes very psychological. We appear to be not what we really are in that show.
Very interesting. Well, before you all leave, we've got refreshments out there, and make sure to buy a book right before you head out the door, and Tom will be out there and Max as well. So thank you all for coming tonight.